And we're live. Happy Saturday, everyone. Late October. This has been a long time coming. Hanging out with Maximus Confesses today. A little bit of a late start, and I'm out of breath having run up the stairs, making sure I have a beer to go with this. But welcome, Maximus.
Hey, glad to be here.
Did you, you said you were out getting food, so you didn't catch Alex Malpass just wrapped up a hangout, 2-hour hangout with Matt Slick, which was quite a fun one.
Did Matt Slick get embarrassed again?
Yes. It was as realistic nihilist said, it was a gold mine, a fucking gold mine. It was quite interesting. And cheers on him for kind of jumping in and taking another abusing, or another beating. But still seems to just not get it at all with respect to what the problem is. Wants to insist that it's something a little less destructive than what it is. So some type of technicality. So, but I wanted to have you on. It's funny because we had the Jimmy Stevens hangout and you were in there. We grilled you for a long time, so that was almost a Maximus Confesses hangout.
I'm sorry. I apologize to Jimmy if I took some of his thunder.
I think you took some of the stress off of having to be on the spot. So,
well, I mean, I've been on Google Plus for a while, and one thing you learn is how to deal with a lot of people with contrary positions just grilling you.
That was the hard part because I think Ocean was in there as well, right?
Right.
So Ocean comes from a very different perspective than anyone else. So that was actually an interesting conversation to try to navigate. By the way, I wore my New England Patriots shirt today just for you.
Oh, you are so kind.
We share that.
Awesome to be fans of the team with the dreamiest quarterback.
So dreamy, so very dreamy.
He just knocks you out with those piercing baby blue eyes.
Yes, not a cheater at all.
Not a bit.
Not a bit.
How could he be a cheater and that good looking? Doesn't make sense.
It's like Donald Trump, cheater and good looking. No, I'm just joking. We won't have any pussy grabbing today. So, so you're a Catholic now, yes?
Right.
Kind of bounced around between some of the Orthodox, well, at least between Anglican, and Catholic varieties.
I've always seen myself as being part of the higher church, as in liturgically high. For those of you who don't know, lower churches are churches with basic ceremony, probably a few prayers here and there, with a sermon thrown in, and every so often the communion. Whereas with the higher church masses, it's very Catholic in the sense that there's smoke. There's always communion every week. There's always someone who is a priest who is a part of it. There's a lot of music and pomp and circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always imagined myself clinging to the higher church and having an emphasis on tradition, which is why even if I was to become a Protestant, I could only see myself as an Anglican or maybe a Lutheran tops. But
I'm surprised I don't know this, but do Anglicans believe in transubstantiation?
In the higher church, they do. It's usually up to the discretion of the clergy member. But if you're a member of the higher church, then there are plenty of people who hold to transubstantiation there.
Okay, so is it every bit as much of a core doctrine as it is for Catholicism? Or?
No, not at all. There are plenty of Anglicans who don't believe in it. But usually the idea is this: no matter what it is, at the end of the day, it's going to be something. So if it is transubstantiation, even if the priest doesn't believe he's transubstantiating, then the priest is still transubstantiating, unless it's. But there are some exceptions, like people in the higher church don't believe that women having ordination as priests make it valid. That's a big cause of conflict in the Anglican communion. Another big cause of conflict is on the issue of homosexuality and gay marriage.
Mm-hmm.
There's a good chunk of the church that approves of it, especially in the United States and Canada. and a huge chunk that doesn't, and that's in the African diocese and the diocese in the UK and Ireland.
Mm-hmm. Do you have to because you've found yourself kind of well, I'd be curious I'd be interested in hearing where you find yourself. What is the issue that is causing you to go between them, or what was the issue, and also how do you take the doctrines that are not quite as in common between the two? How does that not change for you, and really there's one thing that's kind of determined your notions in the past? Or
right. So the reason that I got into Anglicanism was I couldn't get around the fact that in the Catholic Church there were so many things that I thought were declared as miracles that struck me as obviously not miracles. Fatima, I was pretty skeptical of. I was also skeptical of a lot of miracles and miraculous practices attributed to medieval saints, and I always had an inclination to secessionism, the notion that miracles just don't really happen anymore, except maybe in the context of the church, like transubstantiation or something like that, because that's always a miraculous event, even if you're not aware of it.
Where does secessionism, where does that cut off from? Because obviously it's not
Pentecost.
After Pentecost, okay.
Right. Gotcha. So that I thought was a doctrine that was far more in line with what I was seeing on an observational level.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it comes to why I switched back, there was two reasons. One, in the Anglican Church, it was far too divided between the liberal and conservative fragments. I didn't want, with women being ordained, I didn't want my communion to be considered invalid after discovering that some of the bishops were women, or being part of a communion that I would have to fight over having a male priest if I wanted to remain there. That doesn't really strike me as being the life Christ envisioned for the church. Whereas the Catholic Church has always stood by its tradition, always stood by having male clergy, always stood by keeping a constant tradition in place that I could depend on. And really what kind of pushed me back into Catholicism, because I thought, even as an Anglican, it's terrible, but maybe I could still reform it. Maybe I could still be part of a conservative fragment that just says no to all this incoming liberalism. And it was actually after discussing things with Baldy for a bit that he came to give me an interesting position, which was, look, you can't deny miracles could happen after Pentecost. The Catholic Church does say that some are okay to believe in, but it doesn't necessarily entail that they are true, just that believing in them isn't something which is wrong to say, because, for example, even demons could perform miraculous endeavors. Would
not Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus not be considered a miracle, or are you talking about a certain variety of
miracles, something along the lines of
healings and things like that?
Healings, not to mention stuff that was more present in the Old Testament, like the sun stopping in the sky.
Bleeding statues.
Yeah, the bleeding statue one is something I believe is more likely than not false. Yeah. In order to be a miracle, that statue, which is, from what I understand, just condensation trapped, and then when the sun comes out, it just pulls it out. At least as I see it, for that to be a miracle claim, there has to be, in the line of natural causes, something in which is a miracle that we're just not observing. That's just circumstantially there. So the position I've taken is kind of a skepticism towards miracles that happen after Pentecost.
Right.
I think the Catholic Church is in the right position to declare what is okay to believe in as miraculous, because sometimes, depending on wondrous signs, can actually be damaging to the faith. Because so many times I've seen people enamored in their own miraculous religious experience, and the only reason they stick is to have another one of those. Mother Teresa is actually a famous example of this. She actually had what's called the dark night of the soul, where she felt no religious zeal or push. And for years, she was trapped looking for it. And the way she saw it was that was God invoking her, not to religious life because of wondrous signs and this immense feeling within her, but just to do it for its own sake.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe the Catholic Church is there for two reasons. One, to make sure there isn't a flood of believers just claiming miracle, and two, to make sure that people don't mix up what is demonic from what could actually be from God. So I'm a skeptic when it comes to miracle claims. I don't buy into them, and I'm waiting until Judgment Day for God just to explain to me which one really is the miracle and which one might not be.
How do you view the requirements for sainthood then? Like, because obviously that includes 2 miracles, right?
Yeah. With regards to sainthood, I think that traditionally anyone who comes into the church is a saint.
Mm-hmm.
Canonization just makes it official.
Right.
And what happens is it passes. So there are people in the church who look to the intercession of people who aren't canonized. I've heard of priests who ask for the intercession of Origen of Alexandria, whose ideas was declared heretical after his death. Mm-hmm. And the idea was that, look, he's not canonized because, for a good reason. You don't want to give someone whose teachings were auspicious later on.
Right.
But at the same time, if someone contributes to the faith that much, there's certainly some good reason to believe he's in heaven and ask for his intercession. Right. I think the way I view canonization is this. I think the signs are indicative of a proper relationship the saint has to the church, mm-hmm. That people are associating divine things, things which are permissible to believe in, and that in itself acts as a buffer from just this oncoming flood of people who are just considered holy enough. I mean, there are places where this stuff that goes really unchecked. Take in the Caribbean, certain cults that are dedicated to Catholic saints, and these are actual Catholic saints, and they mix it up in their pagan practices. The Catholic Church condemns this sort of thing, but this is usually what happens when the supernatural aspect of the faith is overemphasized.
Right. Yeah.
So, to sum it up, the miraculous wonders or signs for the saints is just indicative that people are associating holy things with the saints and nothing more. Whether these claims are true or not only indicates to me that the canonization should be better considered and should be, in all good wisdom, followed through. Nothing more, nothing less.
There was one person's channel I really enjoy is Clarky Clark, and he does actually a lot of videos on the Catholic Church. And one what was interesting was actually I didn't, even though I'd grown up Catholic, I didn't know how many saints had actually been revoked because now they're believed to have not even existed, which was interesting. It seemed quite a bit more the case than I thought it would have been. But anyway, have you ever seen any of his videos?
Oh, no, I haven't. All I know is his wife is very attractive.
Clarky Clark, really?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to remember her name. She has a piercing through her nose. She's
really?
She's an atheist, but she's also pro-life. Albany Rose, I think that's her name.
Oh, really? I don't know. Are we talking about the same Clarky Clark? Clark?
I believe so. Aren't they married? I was under the assumption they were married.
Huh. I don't know. I hope to have him on soon, but maybe even next week, because I have to do Thursday or Sunday of next week, and he's available on Sundays. So, but he has a whole series he's done. He's got like 10 videos out on the Catholic Church on different aspects, and he talks about. There's one I like it because he ropes in a lot of kind of history into it, which I really enjoy hearing about. And there was one where he just talked about Roman engineers basically being key to the gospel's success in terms of spreading throughout the land, which I thought was kind of an interesting perspective. The
Catholic Church owes a lot to its intellectual pursuits and the pursuits of science and the task of preserving information. I mean, if you look at history, what happened was there was a stillbirth in the Islamic world. You had, honest to goodness, Muslim philosophers practicing philosophia or falsafa. That's the Arabic, and they were challenged by the Kalam school.
Can you explain what philosopha is?
Sure, it's natural philosophy. there were a group of Islamic scholars who believed that in order to understand God, you had to look at the world itself, nature, and that was done by looking at the work of Aristotle and Plato and a lot of these Greek philosophers. And what ended up happening was they took that and understood Revelation and the Quran alongside of it. And they actually had two paths to understanding Allah and Islam and the world itself. But the Kalam school thought that this kind of information was haram, it was kind of dirty or lesser. And if we want to understand truth, we just need to look at God in the Quran, whose understanding is all there, and we should respect the notion that he could have given us the proper keys to learning about this stuff. And as opposed to learning about causality within the world itself, within learning about natural laws, rather they believed in what was called the doctrine of occasionalism. They thought that anytime a cause happens, God is just doing it. Why does a bird stay up in the sky? It's because of the will of Allah.
Right.
If you say, well, no, we actually could look at the aerodynamics of flight and all this other stuff, and they'll say, okay, but those laws themselves are just God causing stuff. Like, they'll just take it down to a more fundamental level. It's pretty interesting. And the idea was, if we're saying that there are laws that God couldn't just break on a whim, aren't we kind of diminishing his power? So they went with some kind of occasionalism, whereas, and when it was taken to Europe, what ended up happening was the same. They took all these Muslim philosophers. Thomas Aquinas cites Al-Ghazali. He cites, who was actually against philosophy, ironically enough, but he cites Avicenna. He cites Averroes. He cites Al-Farabi. All these Arabic philosophers, and alongside of Aristotle and Plato and Augustine and these Greek and Catholic and Church Fathers, and the schoolmen, the scholastics like Aquinas, Duns Scotus, they make their own unique systems, taking on all this prior information. Mm-hmm. And because they didn't accept this occasionalistic worldview, they accepted that the world has these laws that are most of the time in place, except for the odd time where a miracle might need to be done but that's always based on some kind of revelation. So this is kind of one of the reasons why science flourished so well in Christian Europe, as opposed, even though you had bits of it in places like China or the Middle East at certain points. Right. They also copied down a lot of the information, translated it from Arabic, and all of that was pretty necessary. The only drawback was it was only something you could get through the priesthood or being an academic. And mm-hmm. even some other times there were books that were forbidden by the church, like books on skepticism. And by skepticism, I don't mean like modern day skepticism. I mean like, right. How do you know there's an external world skepticism?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so backing up, well, obviously anybody listening to you, I want to kind of get into Max, the person. Anybody listening to you knows that it's obvious that you have an education. So you're going to school for this. So can you talk about that a little bit? So what are you pursuing right now?
Right. So I just got my master's degree in religious studies,
mm-hmm.
and right now I'm doing what's called the qualifying year. And at my university, when you're doing a qualifying year, you take 10 courses, 5 a semester. And after you take those classes, if your grades are well kept and you can keep up with the material, and you already have prior degrees, they'll consider you for their Masters of Philosophy. And that's what I'm hoping to pursue by this time next year. And after that, hopefully a PhD in philosophy. So
that's to transition from a Master's of Theology, which you have,
Masters of Religious Studies, theology,
or Masters of Religious Studies to get into the Masters of Philosophy track. Is that it? Your qualifying year for that. If you had done an undergrad in philosophy, you could have gone directly into Masters of Philosophy.
That's correct, but I didn't. Okay. I didn't follow philosophy up in my own undergraduate university because mm-hmm. there wasn't a program offered at the level. I only took philosophy classes because it was offered as a minor.
I see. And so you're Lebanese, right? And
correct.
Was your family did they? I know that there's a lot of Lebanese that immigrated during the Civil War that was going on, right? There was a
Yep.
there was a Catholic. There was a Catholic. It was a there was a Christian Civil War, right?
No, the Civil War happened across all religious lines.
It did. Okay.
So the Lebanese Civil War, when that was taking place, my dad had left to Canada sometime before then. He went to high school while he was here, whereas he stopped his education at that point. His education in Arabic isn't all that great. He's better educated in English. He has a bachelor's degree in mathematics. My mom, on the other hand, came here after high school, and that was in 1991, right after the war was over.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember. I can't remember if it was. I don't think it was Catholic Protestant. I thought it was like maybe Christian Muslim. There was. I remember seeing some movies about the Lebanese Civil War, and I know there were a lot of religious tension between the groups. I thought it was that is it the North that was more heavily Christian than the South, or
the North is more heavily Christian.
Right.
The South is more heavily Shia, and you get Sunnis in between. What ends up happening is, so the Civil War really started over a couple of things. One, when Israel came in and occupied, there was some discord between them and the Palestinian population, of course, but there were many Palestinians who went into Lebanon, and they ended up firing weapons at Israel.
This is the late 70s, right? Early 80s.
From what I remember, yes.
Yeah.
So what does Israel do when it's attacked? It attacks back. And who's caught in the crossfire? We are. So up until that point, there were plenty of people who joined militias, not the official Lebanese military, and they ended up taking sides around the Palestinians. What do we do with them? Are we going to be aggressive towards them? Are we going to fight alongside of them? What's going to happen? And of course, when that happens, the militias start fighting each other. It was a complete clusterfuck. So,
did you say fluck?
I said fuck, yeah.
Oh, you did say fuck. I thought you said
no,
fluck.
Fluck. I'm
fluck. Thank you for being respectful and keeping it to fluck. Sorry.
Fluck. A fluster cluck. Anyway. So after this, Syria got involved. They actually came in. Their military came into Lebanon under the auspices of declaring peace. And they did actually for a short time in their occupation kind of get Lebanon to calm down. And Israel took some southern farmlands from us as a way to keep the Palestinians at bay, I believe. And the Palestinians still reside in Lebanon in certain camps. And that's how I understand the Civil War. There's actually, in fact, right now, the background behind the Civil War is so divisive in Lebanon that there's actually, from what I understand, no one curriculum that teaches anything about it.
Mm-hmm. There was a big exodus to Canada, though, actually. Canada took on, it seemed like a lot of...
They did.
Lebanese. Yeah.
So did Brazil. In fact, there are more Lebanese people outside of Lebanon than there are inside of Lebanon.
The only reason I know that is because the films that I watch I've seen at least 3 or 4 independent films about that period, and they're all Canadian-made films by people who are Lebanese in descent, which is really interesting. So it's kind of a niche market or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm guessing working for Pixar, you're a big movie guy, so I'm not surprised you'd find that.
I work for DreamWorks, you asshole. I'm not a Pixar employee.
I assumed you worked for the better company.
Oh, I'll take that. No, that's fine. That's fine.
I shouldn't disrespect you with your own hangout.
It's true is true, right? I can't. I have lots of friends at Pixar, so it's all right. Although they haven't made some stinkers recently. Disney's actually kind of the place to be. They're making some good movies right now. So, so did you? So your parents were Christian when they left Lebanon, or your dad was he?
Both my parents are. Actually, they're Christians of different backgrounds. My dad is Eastern Orthodox, and my mom is a Maronite Catholic.
Oh, interesting.
Right. I grew up in the Orthodox Church. I became an atheist for some time in high school and during my undergrad. I came back to Christianity, oddly enough, after hanging around some Christian forums. One of my favorites was Our Christianity. They answered some of my, very basic questions that anyone who read the God Delusion had. Like my objections were basic atheist stuff that I could respond to easily blindfolded.
Mm-hmm.
And after that time, I actually had a religious epiphany, and it was during my extreme religious experience in the Orthodox Church when my dear grandfather passed away that I felt that, yeah, maybe this is definitely the place where I need to be. I fasted. I prayed, and to me, it just felt like being in the right place.
Right.
I wasn't reasoned into the church. Well, I shouldn't say that. My reasoning process, or the arguments I had against Christianity, and the arguments then I possessed in favor of Christianity, wasn't really the dividing factor in making me an atheist or a Christian. It was really feeling endowed with some kind of faith, and what keeps me in the church is always pursuing my faith and understanding. As Augustine says, before you can know, you must believe. And the idea is later formulated by Anselm: when you first have faith, you manage to garner a lot seeking understanding. And if there's one thing I know of the Christian church, even though there's a history of wrong there, there's also a history of discovery, of ingenuity, of a respect for knowledge, natural knowledge even. And some of the greatest and in the past, some of the greatest science has come from the Catholic Church. And yeah, I know people are going to point to stuff like Galileo or Giordano Bruno, but there's actually a terrific series by Tom Woods, who's a PhD in history from Columbia. Mm-hmm. He has a terrific series on the Catholic Church and how it helped build Western civilization. I would suggest, if anyone's skeptical, then go watch those 12 episodes and come back to me and we could discuss it.
Yeah, I cited George Lemaitre last week, which somebody was fortunate enough to know who I was talking about, but his contributions to inflation, right? Or not inflation, but the Big Bang, yeah.
Yep. And here's another interesting tidbit. Giordano Bruno is often claimed to have been killed or burned on the stake because he believed that really the sun was just another kind of star, and all these other stars were just their own suns to some kind of background solar system. But that's not really why he was killed. He was killed, and I'm not saying I support the reason why he was killed, is because he was a pantheist. He believed that God and nature were somehow united. Mm-hmm. And of course, when you teach this, and you have a Catholic Church who has history of getting medieval on your ass, yeah, it's not great, but it's not because they were anti-science. It's because they were, it's just because they were dogmatic about their own religious revelations and doctrines. If you look at Nicholas of Cusa, who was a cardinal in the Catholic Church and who existed before Bruno, he was a cardinal and he advised the Pope, and he held the same doctrine with regards to the universe. He thought that the sun and the stars were just similar entities or the same entity.
So in terms of your sorry, I keep bouncing back to you.
No worries.
In terms of your own personal practice, so when you were just talking just a bit like 5 minutes ago, you were talking about how you became persuaded of things. But was there a time during your childhood through till now that you didn't believe, or did you always believe to some degree, and it was just a matter of what you believed?
So,
I guess.
Right. So I was always somewhat of a believer. Very nominal when I was a kid. I thought, Sunday school, God is great. He's love. He loves you. Let's look about the ark and some of the parables Jesus says in other places. Basic Old Testament stories that weren't overtly gruesome, with a lot of New Testament parables. Mm-hmm. But that was really the extent of my knowledge. When I started getting into religion, it was in junior high of all places, and I knew a couple of Muslims who were far better educated in their religion, And what ended up happening was they kept saying I was wrong, and that encouraged me to go to the internet, which is this fairly new source I had. And I actually just looked some basic stuff on Islam that most apologists say anyway. I think they were trick tracks and stuff. Allah being a moon god, which is complete bullshit. Like Allah isn't a solar deity. Allah is just Arabic for God. It literally means the deity. Allah, Elohim, like they have a similar semantic background. But anyway, when that happened, I just started engaging first with Muslims, and we had back and forths. And then when I was in high school, I started having back and forths with an atheist professor, a teacher who taught a history class and religious studies class. And he was actually teaching stuff. I remember looking back on it, he actually presented the Zeitgeist movie as kind of proof that Jesus didn't exist. But then I told him, oh wait, this is also saying September 11 didn't happen, and that's obvious bullshit. And he said, yeah, you know what, you're right about that. I should probably be a little more skeptical. And then he actually cited Bart Ehrman, of all people. And I said, that's just a biased source. And he says, everyone's biased to a certain extent. That would just mean we'd have to throw out all knowledge. And anytime I said, well, what about, and when he brought up evolution contradicting and science, I said, why can't they just work together? But now you're just rephrasing your religious beliefs to cohere. I'm like, oh. And then I felt, look, if I had to keep defending this, then maybe I'm just wrong about it. And I just thought it was easier not to be a Christian. And also there are these moral hangups that when you're a teenager who frankly is a little horny, you just don't like that. So I ended up leaving in high school for those plurality of reasons. And then it was later on in my third year of university, and between that time I was an obnoxious atheist. And I'm not saying all atheists are obnoxious.
But really the only reason was your right hand. That's the only reason you left.
Not my only reason, but it was a part of it.
Sorry.
It was a part of it.
Wasn't it Jesus said, wait, was it what the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing?
So anyway, not as I was saying, not all atheists are obnoxious. Many of them, especially on Google Plus, have always been kind, respectful, and gentle with me. I believe. I mean, me and you, I consider us to be on very good terms, on even better terms than I am with other Christians. But it wasn't until my third year of university when I started working with the Bible study group, and which helped me understand the Bible a little better. And I also hung around some of the Christian forums on the internet and had my religious experience where I just came back into it. And since then, I've been, even though I've had a lot of positions that are present within Christendom, I've always been seeking understanding through faith.
Yeah, I think one thing that can be said about you, Max, is that you're interested first and foremost in what is true. And I think that that's not always the case, or doesn't appear to be the case with many Christians. And I think you actually get a lot of respect from everyone for that. That I remember I think Dave S had that or not Dave S, it was Scientist Scientist had the hangout with Trey. And I remember you were alongside, like trying to egg Trey or encourage Trey to have better arguments and to have better I think at one point he just wanted to be dismissive of brute facts. You're like, look, that's not an argument. Go ahead and argue against it, but find some reason to not think it's the case. Like argue from the PSR, right? Or find some way to argue against it. You can't simply just dismiss it. And I've always, I think from the first time I saw you in the hangouts with Gibran, Ludwig, and Ozzy and John F. McDropout, when the four of you guys were getting together and talking about Van Til or Anselm or talking about these various texts or Euthyphro, it was encouraging to see four people with different backgrounds come together and give texts a fair reading and actually scrutinize them on their own merits and not and try to leave your baggage at the door. And I was really impressed by that. And it helps that you're my most watched. I think you're not anymore. I think the Matt Slick debate actually took over the spot as the most watched video on my channel.
Damn you, Alex Mel Plus.
No, not with Alex. It was with it was terrible. It was Smalley, I think. It's not a great debate. I mean, you should really. I mean, I think it'd be more flattering if Alex Malpass and Matt Slick surpassed you. But
that would actually be better. It would be like I would at least understand it if a PhD in philosophy surpassed me in embarrassing that.
It's the Euthyphro exchange, which I think was one of my first videos. But I had
Euthyphro so much.
I had to make that because it was just so astounding to hear his the hypocrisy within that group, that and the way that they treated you, and then the way they talked about you off air, as if you had been the one who had shirked the question when you had answered 100 of them, and they
wasn't even answered,
and they hadn't answered one, and then they accused you of reading from a script, which earlier they were arguing that scripts are fine or whatever. And you weren't reading from a script. Anybody who knows you knows that that's kind of your cadence and your. And that you were leaning in to listen to the computer or whatever. Yeah. Anyway,
that was back when I was living in a dorm room in Waterloo, Ontario, and I wasn't even using my laptop or computer. It was my cell phone, and I always had to come into the speaker, so I was always leaning into it a little.
Right. I'm sure now. I'm sure you take a lot of flack for being like. I had always, even as a Reformed Christian, I had a very low view of orthodoxy, of Catholics and of Eastern Orthodox. I saw it as being a lot of ritual, very thin on content, not being very knowledgeable in Scripture, which is true for a large swath of Catholics, right? Like that's a problem that's a problem within the Roman Catholic Church. I think it was certainly a problem with my family. And I think it was different in that I think that the evangelical worship services, not the worship service, but the messages and whatnot, some of the Bible churches have a deeper rooting in Scripture in a way where it's harder to be ignorant, I think, of some passages. Whereas I think it's easier in the 40 minutes of ritual and 10 minutes of homily in the Catholic Church. But I'm sure that you deal with a bit of bias in terms of people strawmanning Catholicism or orthodoxy, I should say, like the Catholic, or when you were Anglican, right? Like Matt Slick was perfect in that when he was like, "What are you? Oh, you're Anglican," and then later on he just whips that out as a way to just ad hom you, right?
Right.
So what's your opinion of that? Like, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about first?
True. It's completely true. Most Catholics do not have most Catholics are nominal. They don't have an understanding of Scripture. That is something we need to work on in the church. That's something I wholeheartedly embrace as a criticism from my Reformed and evangelical brethren. In fact, what I would like to see, though, isn't really what I see in Protestant churches either. I think theology has to be really respected as a discipline of knowledge in its own right. I mean, at a time, theology was a form of knowing. It was a Wissenschaft in German, or loosely translated as science, in the sense that it was thought of a way to get real knowledge of the world, and that priests and theologians were real people who, or real experts in their fields, who could dispense knowledge to the laity. And unfortunately, that's not something you can dispense in a 20-minute sermon at church. And it's unfortunate. I think that in order to get that kind of thing going on, you have to dispense it in the Catholic community. There should be Bible classes led by the priest or deacon or someone with sufficient scriptural knowledge, and people should also know about Catholic theology as well. I think
even in the rendering of the liturgy, when the readings are happening, because you have in the Catholic Mass, typically you have three kind of readings that occur, And then the homily is usually a message that is formed around that theme.
Mm-hmm.
But I think most people sit there brain dead listening to the three conveyances of scripture, not tying them together. And there's no room for that type of connection. Like afterward, the funny thing is actually after I became an evangelical and started going to Bible studies, then when I'd go home and go to mass, I'm like, oh, I see what's happening, right? Like
that is so true. In fact, I'll admit it happens to me. Like sometimes, like I was in mass just last week, and what happened was I was thinking of, hey, are Kantian ethics compatible with Christianity? And I was thinking of some of the problems they would be having, and the scripture readings were going on right there in front of me, and I'm like, oh shit, I should actually be paying attention. and oddly enough, I was thinking about an ethical problem, which was, okay, I was thinking about in the Hangout with Jimmy, hey, if I believe God is perfectly just and perfectly merciful in his own right, and he is between the persons of the Trinity, and there's obviously no evil there, why couldn't that exist within creation? I thought that was a pretty decent objection no one else gave me, so I thought of just reflecting on that one. And then I thought of Kantian ethics because, oh no, it's not only the fact that they have to be, justice and mercy have to exist within creation, people have to pursue them for their own sake. And apparently, and Jesus actually gave a parable about this, and he gave the expression of a judge who not only who did the right thing, but for the incorrect motivation. It was just to get a poor woman to stop begging to him. And he gave there was justice being done, but it wasn't done in the right spirit. So then I thought, wait a minute, thinking of what else was going down, if God wants human beings to decide on justice, to look at God mercifully, then shouldn't that be done for its own sake rather than God determining it beforehand?
Mm-hmm.
And it was on thinking that that actually could be a reason why God allows evil. There's a human being who has a capacity for free will, maybe not like a full-on libertarian free will, but maybe like something with a little more leeway. And God allows evil so there could be an honest pursuit of the virtues for their own right, and not because of some deterministic motivation. And evil wouldn't exist within God, because God by nature just pursues mercy and justice for its own sake, whereas human beings require some kind of free choice for it to be for its own sake, because they're not eternal beings. They're beings that are finite, have to align themselves with the proper state of ethics and morals in order for that to be a pursuit of justice and mercy for its own sake rather than for a sake otherwise. And it was actually by tuning in, oddly enough, where that parable was able to inspire me. So I think, so I've kind of learned that I shouldn't be brain dead while the scriptures are going on, because you might just miss some very important moral inspiration.
Yeah, probably not going to be brain dead at any point certainly during the mass. So where do I want to go from here?
It's up to you.
Yeah, it is indeed.
We could talk about the Patriots, but I don't think
could. Yeah,
that would only interest us.
I might lose even worse than religious conversation. I might lose more viewers talking about the Patriots. So, although, I grew up in New England, and New England is a very Roman Catholic area of the United States. There's a lot of Roman Catholics in the area up there. Let's see. So, what do you want to do? What do you want to eventually do with your degree, Max?
I want to obtain some kind of professorship. And I would actually like it if it was in Lebanon, of all places.
Really? Have you ever? How many times have you been to Lebanon?
Let's see, about 8-9 times in my life.
Oh wow! So you've been there quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm learning to speak Arabic. I've taken a formal class. Well, not a formal class. They're teaching me informal Lebanese Arabic, which is a nice first step. And I figure, heck, if I have a degree from a Canadian university, it might look much better when I apply on my CV. And having 2 master's degrees don't hurt.
Yeah. Wow. That's quite a journey, I guess, or ambition.
And I do want to give something back to my parents' country. Living in Canada, I've always given at least tax dollars here, and I've participated and volunteered in Canadian life, and I'm always grateful for this part of my identity. But there's another part I also feel like exploring and giving back to as well.
Why are there so many Canadians on G Plus in this community? There's so many.
Because there's so much snow on. There's so much snow outside that we're blockaded indoors. So
that's what it is. This is a pastime you can take advantage of when you're snowed in. We have too good of weather down here for social media.
I mean, that's what made giving up pornography so hard in high school. If I had G Plus, maybe I'd have something else to do on the net.
Well, there's a way to warm your hands too. How do you okay. Let's see. So I guess maybe one thing I was I'm going to go ahead and, do you mind if I open up the Hangout a bit and get some conversation going?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is that right with you? Because I'm going to have to cut it at 7 p.m.
So an hour and a half,
yeah,
around 40 minutes.
But mostly I have some I know Joe Sonseed a couple weeks ago wanted to talk about divine simplicity, and I thought that would be actually an interesting thing to chat about. I hadn't really thought about it till today. I just remembered that he was interested, or I think I mentioned it the other day, but I wasn't sure what to do. But I wouldn't mind hearing about some of your views. Like, it sounds like you're not in favor then of women in the priesthood.
I am definitely not.
What about in terms of married priests?
Well, we actually have them in the Eastern Rite of the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. I have no problem with it as long as the rite recognizes it. However, I do believe that marriage should happen prior to any ordination. So if they find someone, fall in love with them after, tough cookies. Sorry.
Wow, that's pretty harsh.
You made a promise, and you should keep in line with it. If a spouse dies while they're in the priesthood, I'm sorry, there's no remarriage.
Interesting.
So that's usually how it's portrayed in the Eastern Rite. If it's incorporated into the Western tradition, I'd have no problem with that either. Mostly because I grew up around it in the Eastern Orthodox Church. But women priests is fully unprecedented. There's only one emergency case that ever happened, and that was because all the men were killed off. And even though the bishops didn't approve of it, they still forgave everyone involved because they realized the gravity of not having any male priests.
Right. Were you saying something, Spackle?
Yeah, really important. I wanted to say I have hummus for the occasion.
Yum.
Continue.
I thought you were going to come in here and give me an earful of not wanting any female priests.
Oh, no, I mean, just what? Just because I was en route to being a youth pastor for years and years? No.
I would be happy. I never said I wouldn't. I never said I'd object to a female youth pastor. Youth pastors are awesome.
I still don't fully understand.
As long as you call yourself a director, you're okay.
Exactly.
What was that, Frank?
I still don't fully understand why women can't be priests. I was like, it's one of the things that I just don't get.
Oh, so the reason for it is twofold. Well, I should definitely say it's onefold. Tradition teaches against it, and it's been, and this has been solidified in the councils. The councils are a string of authorities that one cannot contradict.
No, I get that, right? I get that it's teaching. Like usually before these councils, there's like arguments and stuff. Like there's reasons given that lead up to, and I know you don't have to believe in the arguments, like the de fide teaching, I think it's called, whenever it's something that you
exactly.
But like the de fide teaching comes from arguments. It comes from debates. I'm asking, how did that come about? Where did that teaching come from? I don't know the history. And even if I did, I don't know if the arguments would be good. Like,
it would come. Various appeals to Scripture plus the apostolic authority So those would be the two places.
Do you think there's a disposition to the kind of the male patriarchal role that conduces to priesthood in a way that women don't? Or how do you?
Well, considering that the Virgin Mary is the highest of all of creation, and she doesn't have a penis, to what I remember, she is definitely. We don't have a problem with women taking up the upper echelon of authority within creation. The church itself is a female. We are the bride of Christ. All men. I'm a bride of Christ. I'm happy to say that.
I meant more like you. Like I think I've seen you make kind of teleological arguments before. Do you think that there's a disposition to men that is that lends itself to priesthood, or that's what I meant? I didn't mean I didn't mean to diminish women, but do you think there's actually a reason that men are suited to be priests?
Oh, right. Men are suited to be priests because they take upon. Priests are the altar of Christus, and men bear in their authority. Men are supposed to come as close to Jesus as possible in their presence. They're supposed to take on the role of a husband. And I'm speaking functionally here. So if the priest is supposed to take on the function of Christ, and one of Christ's function is as a husband to the church, and only men can be husbands, then it would follow that the man is best suited for the priesthood.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of the arguments actually used for the councils. No, there's a counter that, well, Jesus was also Palestinian, but we allow white, black, Chinese priests, all of them. And the response to that is the race doesn't play a function in marriage. And if Christ is supposed to function as the husband, then that role is supposed to is best suited by a male over a female. And that's why we go to the male priest.
How does sex play a function aside from
Oh, well, only men can function as husbands.
How so? I know a couple of transgenders who would disagree with you.
Oh, well, no, I mean, that's a whole other discussion of whether or not... yeah, that's a whole other discussion. And
what is your view on, we talked about homosexuality just briefly, and not that has anything to do with transgender, but in terms of these dispositions that the church historically has been against, what's your own views on it, Max?
Oh, okay. So my view is that homosexuality, in terms of a sexual orientation of who you're attracted to, is not sinful. Being attracted to another man is not a sin. Being attracted to another woman is not a sin.
I can see where this is going.
It is only when you only when you commit sexual union wherein it becomes sinful.
Max and I have talked about this.
I actually made the argument for against a couple of Reformed friends that that was, if men can have the orientation such that they are attracted to other men as a partner, in a romantic relationship, not merely sexually, but romantically interested in men, that allowing them to marry allows them to partake in the body, in the bride, and the bridegroom, and the in the body and the head, all of the church and Christ symbolism that's meant to be. Yeah, I know, I'm doing really well. All of the so that's what happens when you have like half of a Speedway stout, right? Like,
okay. Sorry, go on.
No, that's fine. The fullness of that experience, because that's what marriage is supposed to be, right? It's supposed to reproduce the relationship that Christ has with the church, right?
Right.
And that the fullness of that can't be enjoyed by any homosexual Christian, right?
Actually, you can. I would argue it can, but sorry, go ahead.
You would argue it can because they can be married to a female, then?
No, because they can be married to the church. The church can operate as your spouse. If you can't give yourself to one person,
how'd that work out with your hand?
What a consolation prize!
Hey, we're all called. We're all called not to use the hand.
The
Max, that
The
opens
church
it up
cannot
so...
operate as a spouse. It's
that
not
opens up... that opens it up for so many
bad
priest and
jokes.
nun jokes. No, priest and nun jokes right now.
Speaking of opening up
I'm just saying.
something. Wait.
like there's multiple functions which happen in marriage, right? But like the big one is sort of not there. So like,
Can you offer us the full spread of your views, Max?
Right. Well, actually, in marriage, there are sometimes where the husband is called not. So, in certain circumstances, there are things that can happen which would call upon no sexual union, even between two people of the same gender. I mean, of two people of different genders and sex. So, for example, if one partner contracts AIDS or an STD that could be spread on to the offspring, then and that prevents any notion of reproduction that's moral, and the only way to engage in sex is through a use of condoms or birth control, which would as a result make sex purely for gratification and not for its telos or end, then it would follow that that couple also shouldn't engage in it as well. Sex isn't the cornerstone of marriage. The cornerstone of marriage is to give yourself fully to the other person for its own sake, not because you're getting sexual gratification out of it, not because it's easy, not because you're happy, but purely it's a pure call to love for its own sake.
That's perfectly something that homosexuals can do.
That is, well...
That to each other. It just so happens that part of that is sex.
Wait, I mean, I fail to see it. In terms
Why?
in terms of two homosexual men who esteem each other in a very romantic way, but don't consummate it in a sexual partnership, there's nothing wrong with that. I'd actually have. I couldn't point to anything sinful about it. However, when it comes to the act itself, consummating it, that's where it becomes an issue. There are plenty of instances in the church of two males who have a fondness for each other, but keep it in Christ. In the sense,
Jonathan when he takes off all his clothes.
Is there an argument for why the act itself, like aside from the defeat?
Yes, there is an argument for the right. There is actually an argument for it.
Because like everything else seems to be like all the other functions of marriage.
It's related to telos, right?
Yeah, exactly. The final cause of sex is in reproduction, and if you're engaging in sex without that procreative capacity, then what ends up happening is you're bypassing its intent, and you're using the person for another end in itself, which isn't natural or proper, but it's done for a different sake itself. For example, you could be using the other person for your own happiness, your own gratification.
Obviously, you're going to run up against individuals who cannot reproduce and are thus using their sexual organs for purposes other than that purpose. Yeah. How would that be different? Is it because they can't? Right. Can something have more than one telos, right? So can a male penis be used to piss and to ejaculate?
Right. This is the biggest difference between teleology and teleonomy. So I really love Epidemic 2020's example of scissors. If you're using scissors as a stabbing implement, I mean, it works really great as a stabbing implement. But that's not its purpose. Its purpose is to cut things. That's specifically what it was designed for. That's its explicit end. Now, when in terms of how a couple who can't reproduce in their own right, when they engage in sex, even though there are going to be times where people don't procreate from it.
Wait, can you go back to this just before you get to that? Because the scissors example, can you explain how that works with the penis? Because that's where I'm going to get caught up here. Because the penis has multiple uses. Right?
It works much. I know. I mean, the scissors thing works a lot better for lesbians.
I'm sure it does. That's why I don't need the penis. Like the
Right.
penis is a tricky one, right? Like, are you going to tell me it's meant to? Its telos is to piss. Or are you going to tell me its telos is to have sex with?
Okay, so so yeah, something can have. So in terms of the penis, I'm not sure. There are two. The penis works alongside two systems. One system is the system of getting out waste, and the other system is the reproductive system. So in that light, the penis does exist for both ends, but there's a system in which, but it's because it participates in these two prior systems as a whole, which it gets both ends from. So the way to think of it is as this: if human beings didn't evolve into creatures which sexually reproduced, then we could garner happiness in other ways. However, when it comes to the main reason we evolved it, and the main reason it's stuck, it's because of sexual reproduction. But to answer the question about two people of this who can't reproduce because of their reproduction system or something related to that end, that's not because of their own. They're not themselves abrupt. They're not themselves the cause of what's the word? They're not. They themselves aren't willing for their sexual organs to not be non-reproductive. They're not the ones who are. Oh, the proper word is thwarting. They're not thwarting their own ends. Rather, that's just a byproduct of what they really have to work with. Whereas lesbians and homosexuals in principle cannot reproduce. The difference is between a system that isn't properly working and using a system that in its own purpose isn't supposed to have that end. So that's where I would kind of demarcate between the two. And let's see. Just to use another example, there's a case where a woman who was trans blind. That's probably the best way I could describe it. She felt that inside she was really a blind person, and along with a psychiatrist, purposely blinded herself just to fulfill that kind of internal image she had of herself. Now, I would actually say that would be wrong and a form of mutilation. And I'd say it for a good reason, because she is purposely thwarting the ends of even having eyes to begin with. Whereas someone who is naturally blind is someone who isn't blind because they're willing or preventing their sight from working. That's just a byproduct of their own biology. Whereas with homosexuals and lesbians, they are purposely using their bodies and thwarting their ends just for the sake of gratification or something of the like. Does that help explain it?
It makes sense. There's a next there's like a next step. The next step goes into metaethics. So
I was going to say that
the
the
next
word
question is
gratification
why aren't we
necessarily.
and then it goes into metaethics, and I don't want to go that way. So
Yeah.
If you're in an intimate relationship, it would be like a bonding situation. So you always think of the big bang, shall we say, as the reason why you would do that. But it's not always about gratification. It's also about bonding and experience and closeness, right? You got the oxytocin going on and things like that. Is that gratifying? Yes. But is that just using somebody, or is that a purposeful interaction? So I think it's really interesting. Catholics are kinder on this issue than most evangelicals, but I do think it's interesting that teleos is brought up, and then half of the reason why you do it is just ignored as if it's some sort of byproduct. The only reason why you do it is have children. So everybody that's married should just get unmarried, because what's the purpose?
It's the telos of the system itself, not of the individual, not their purpose. It's the why God created the actual system, and this is where teleonomy and theology comes in. It's well, if I evolved this way, I would say it doesn't really matter because I can change my own nature by choosing this or that. Whereas Max would probably say something like, well, that sort of presupposes God doesn't exist and God hasn't designed these things. So I said it gets into meta-ethics. It goes into this.
Exactly. And I'm actually very grateful, Frank, you recognize where the debate really lies, because it is really a question of one's meta-ethical presumptions. I don't think I could make this.
Argument will not work on us, right? I think Max understands that unless we believe in God, that argument should not convince us. But it does explain.
I'm only.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, I mean that's true with any argument put up against somebody who doesn't agree with it, right? Like I
but it makes his view internally consistent. My original question, which started this whole thing, was
I don't know that it is though, because I think that you have places where the telos isn't like telos seems to assume that the function is there, right? Like the use has to be like it has to conduce to that use. Now there are plenty of people like older people, like this was brought up in the Supreme Court, right? Like so you have older people who remarry, right? Like obviously they're not having reproductive function there, right? So if the telos is towards the ends of reproduction, and you're going to argue that that is the only suitable use for it, to the point where it's immoral to use it otherwise towards another end, then these people shouldn't be getting remarried and having sex. They should be having sexless marriages.
Exactly, and that's what the Catholic Church endorses.
Yeah, well, yeah. I think that's an untenable.
Like, you're really trying to give us a reductio of doctrines we're already believing and people think we're ridiculous for.
Yeah, that's how it goes. That's how I argue against Matt Slick too, right?
The Catholic Church says that if you're malfunctioning sexual organs, you shouldn't have sex.
The Catholic Church teaches. So if one person is sterile, the Catholic Church would still permit sexual intercourse then, but that's only because the system itself is the cause of the non-reproduction going on, not the intentful thwarting of the system.
How many times are you allowed to thwart your system?
None.
None?
But you are allowed to thrust your system in certain circumstances.
Wait. What was Bert's reductio again? I was sort of like putting my power cord in when he was talking.
Frank, come on.
Just that people shouldn't get remarried and reproduce with other spouses.
I was saying that telos assumes that it can serve that function, right? And so in the cases where it doesn't serve that function, not only for homosexuals, but for anyone, where they're using it for a means where it's not going to result in the use, the telos of the thing. If we're arguing that it has a telos and then it isn't functional towards that, then any use for any other reason would be immoral. It would be against the use of it, with the intended use for it. Now, I'd argue that that's a pretty restrictive understanding of what the use is of a penis, right? Like, or of a vagina, right? Like,
possible functions versus the.
Insofar as they're sex organs, insofar as they're other organs, you could use it for those other purposes.
But sex serves a use in relationships, right? Like it has.
Its primary, but its primary end is to reproduce children.
Oh, I don't. Well.
Except
I think there.
That's actually in my case primary.
This goes up to the highest level.
I think there are all sorts of couplings.
The hope of all. There are all sorts of all teloses.
But there are all sorts of coupling reinforcements, right? Like you can't.
I don't think there can be telos in. There can be telos if you like teleonomy. There can be in a naturalistic view. But
never telos.
Actual purposes. There might be. You could say that primarily sex evolved for reproduction. But the thing is, sex evolved for pretty much anything. Things don't evolve for as towards an end. They evolve. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, yeah. So he's not talking about suitability towards some end or whatever. He's talking about that this had an antecedent purposive quality to it.
Yeah.
But if it's not serving that function, then it should be then use of it for any other purpose would be immoral. And so what I'd say is that the reductio is that the application is inconsistent. So either you have to be consistent towards that principle, or there's something wrong with that. Now I'd argue that there are uses towards like my wife and I, when we have sex, is not just to reproduce, and it's not just for pleasure either. Well, I see Joe's eyes light up. Don't worry,
sometimes it's maintenance.
She's Asian. She doesn't do much. Let me just say.
Wow.
You got the starfish.
She is a star. She is a starfish, but under the sea. Under the sea.
Oh man!
Wow,
This
this is
How's
awkward.
going to be tonight if you ever watch this.
She's on her period anyway. I can't do anything. I'm just joking.
Bad.
But the thing is that there are all sorts of good, like these are important aspects to any relationship. It has more than one use, right? Like there's a reason there are other systems that, like, if you could argue from a biological standpoint, there are other systems that work in concert with it to produce other effects between a couple, right? Like,
right, but no, that's true. But here's the thing: when we're talking about final causality, we're talking about something metaphysical. So when I speak of final cause, we shouldn't just think of the finality of it, its actual end, but the fact that its finality is also causal in a certain circumstance in its existence. So when I say that sex is for the final cause of sex is procreation or procreating, what I mean to say is if it wasn't for the capacity to procreate, being prior to the actual existence or the instance of the sexual organs and the sexual union, then that sexual union itself wouldn't exist. So that's why it has to be.
How does this not fall into the same system clause that you had to get around penises that pee versus penises that have reproductive function, right? Like, couldn't I just argue that that's another system, that it's meeting the purpose of its system?
Oh, you mean like for peeing?
No, well, I'm saying that like peeing, like between peeing and reproducing, you could have a system. There's a hormonal system for reinforcement of qualities of the a relationship that's going on between a man and a woman is edified, like it is enriched by the sexual experience, right?
There's actually, have you ever been, anyone's familiar with a bit of Augustine, when he envisioned sex in the Garden of Eden before the fall, he actually argued that it would be like shaking hands or something akin to that. It would be, it would just be dutiful. It wouldn't.
That's because wait. That's
all of our issues come from him.
On Augustine.
Oliver
that is easily explained. Augustine was a starfish.
Yes, easily. But in any case, the point of that is just to state that it's the suspicion of sex by most of the by Augustine and most mystics beforehand is this. It's when it thwarts kind of it's when it's more animalistic components or lower appetites, as it were, thwarts the rational appetite. So when we understand sex and its final cause, its supreme purpose or end, even if it didn't garner us any pleasure as rational human beings, we would recognize the importance that this would play in reproducing and making more offsprings. And the whole point of bringing that up or serving as its final cause is simply would simply be that how do I put this? Would simply be that is the main reason or goal or end or good which it's aligned. To use the sexual organ in a way that thwarts its final end would be like thwarting the final end of your eye in seeing by dousing it with some kind of acidic component that prevents vision.
I just want to say that Augustine should have read Song of Solomon with the ivory tusks and the flowing honey and all that, because I think he missed the point.
The point of that poem was merely that
thwarted in your eye, it hurt. Well, wait. What happened?
Like the whole "I'm tired of love" thing, or I'm love sick, or I'm sick of love, or isn't that where
So
the
he did read it. Did he have like a commentary on it, Mac?
Let's see. I'm not sure if he actually had a commentary on it, but he most likely read it because he has a pretty good understanding of scripture, and I'm pretty sure he cited it. Just give me a minute.
Augustine had a lot of issues. He lived a really, really wild sexual life, and he felt guilty for it. Let's get real. He had an extremely paganistic, hedonistic lifestyle before he became a Christian.
It got to the point where he was just shaking hands all the time.
Probably.
We were doing starfishes in his
because everybody's as depraved as dirty.
He was the Dio of his time.
The Dionysus.
The Dionysus of his time. What did Augustine's Tinder profile say? I wonder. Was he into vitamins?
He's like a woman.
Rhetorician in Rome looking for one night stand with 13-year-old. Actually, his first wife was he married his first wife when she was 13, which was common back then.
Did she die, or did he have?
No, she bore him a son, and later on, as he grew older, she left them, and he was left to take care of his son as a single father.
She left him because he said, "You want to try new things."
So, were you looking up something, Max, or do we want to transition?
Oh, I was just looking up his references to Song of Solomon. The Song of Solomon clearly teaches that. Oh, never mind. I'm trying to find where exactly he cites.
Is this like in some sort of Bible program you're using? Like,
there's
like all the commentaries of Augustine.
I'm just looking for a list of scripture citations that Augustine has in his various works. He has somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000, and if it's that many, then chances are the Song of Songs is one of them.
Alex downed his last Pliny earlier with Matt Slick, fresh off of his Matt Slick appearance.
Hey, Alex. Pleasure to meet you again.
Okay, so do we want to talk about this some more? Because I know that a couple of weeks ago, Joe had an itch to talk about. Wait, is Joe still there? Starfish still there? Oh yeah, he's the little rabbit icon. You had an interest in talking about divine simplicity.
What's up? You wanted to talk about Trey?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh, there are actually a lot of viewpoints on divine simplicity.
What's your viewpoint, Max?
I think there are a lot of viewpoints that do work, but the one I'm kind of most interested in, and I kind of find myself sympathizing with the most, is the truth maker view of divine simplicity. So when you say that God is omnipotent or God is powerful or whatever quality you ascribe to him, you're not dividing the quality from the being itself. Rather, it's just kind of a nominalization. And when I say that God is good, what I'm saying is God's essence is the truth maker for his goodness, as it is with his omnipotence, as it is with his whatever other quality you want to list. Whereas other beings who aren't simple cannot just look to themselves as truth makers, but have to look to states of affairs outside of them as well. I mean, the reason Plato is so if I was to say Plato is a philosopher, I'd have to not just look at anything intrinsic to Plato. I'd actually have to look at his history, the fact that he studied under the Pythagoreans. Did he study under the Pythagoreans? I think he did. Stuff like that. My history, understanding of philosophy's history is shaky. Maybe Alex can correct me on that. But that's kind of the viewpoint I'm most attracted to. And another viewpoint is Scotus's viewpoint as well, where the distinctions are merely formal. They exist, but they're just formal and inseparable from one another in the being of God. That's another viewpoint that I think is defensible.
So you don't see it as let me make sure I'm understanding you correctly. You don't take the, like, I've heard divine simplicity referred to as a kind of the unifying, that there's no parts essentially that God can't be spoken about in terms of his attributes, that it is that our experience of them is the distinguishing factor. But it seems like you don't take that view.
Right. So in terms of that, I do take that view as well, in the sense that I think if you want to understand God as immutable, you'd have to look at the changes as purely subjective projections you make on God through the fact that you're a finite being who sees or perceives things.
Right. So when you say that God loves or doesn't love, it's your relation to him that is attenuating that that quality in him.
Yes.
But
Wait,
it's
what about
not
the Trinity?
it's not him changing his manifestation of that. It's your changing in proximity.
The Trinity, I just understand as a divine mystery.
Yeah, like isn't that supposed to be an actual division in God? It's an actual part. And also, there's I think the Orthodox to say the essence energy distinction as well. Like it's a real distinction. Like in the scholastic sense, it's real. It's not. It's. I mean, I think Aquinas said there's like a metaphysical and a physical distinction.
They're distinct, but they're not divided.
Okay, so that would be
is how it's usually phrased. So I think the person who actually put it most coherently is Scotus, but the idea is simply this. If there is a distinction between the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in the substance of God, it's by relation and not by cause or them existing more fundamentally than the substance of the divine. So Gregory of Nyssa has a nice example. Me, Bert, and Frank are all human beings, and we all are. So we're three distinct individuals, yet we share one humanity between us. The difference between me and God, on the other hand, is this. Between us and God, on the other hand, is this. Our humanity is individuated and separated between us because we all occupy different states of matter and relation. But God isn't individuated by his matter or anything else. Now, the only point of the analogy isn't to state that this is how God works, but just that something can be three in one instance, in the sense that they all hold distinct relational differences in the substance, but they can remain part of one substance nonetheless.
So I guess where this falls, one of the places this falls apart for me is when you have, and this is where I get to with Trey when I was talking with Jimmy or anyone else, is you have this notion of a whole that then you're saying has additional parts that are making it distinct from the whole, but that it's still the whole, right?
Well,
like,
so if I was to take a knife and stab you in the liver, and you were to say, "Hey, you shouldn't do," and someone says, "Hey, you shouldn't do that to another person," and you're agreeing in pain, and I'm like, "Why not?" Well, you're stabbing another human being, and I'm like, "No, I'm stabbing a liver." Even though you're a human being, even though I did take a knife and stab one part of you, your humanity permeates through all of your body. Likewise,
right, but if you removed my liver, though, it wouldn't be me, though, right?
Yes, because at that point your humanity wouldn't permeate through it. There's some kind of notion of in terms of your person, there's some kind of continuality going on from head to toe. And whenever you separate a particular part, it ceases to be part of that substance and becomes its own individual existing thing. It doesn't exist through you. It exists distinct from you. Likewise, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, they are one substance. That substance permeates through all members, and these members are distinct in their relationship within that substance. So that's kind of how I'd parse it out.
You could just say that it's like you are a whole, and until a part is separated from you, it's part of that whole. But once it's separated from you, it's a different whole.
Exactly, and God. The difference, and the main difference between God and you would be that unlike you and your liver, which are separable, the persons of the Trinity remain inseparable. A nice illustration I like to use is: has anyone seen one of those interesting images where if you look at it in three different ways, you're seeing three different images, but it's part of the same image?
Right, but none of those individual images are the same as the main image, right?
They're all distinct from the main. They're all distinct from one another, but they all exist through the same picture and medium.
I have an argument against this, but I want to actually I want to make sure we get to Alex's question because he has a question on simplicity.
Thing. I mean, God technically isn't whole because he has no parts, but like he he wouldn't be.
I guess we're not going to get to you, Alex.
No, it's
No, the
fine.
Trinity allows for distinctions. They just can't be separate. They can't. They're just indivisible in nature, and they can't be in principle divided.
The simple
So
one,
there's
right?
so that's the difference between a distinction and a division.
Let's go ahead before we drift too far from it. Let's get to Alex's question, and then we can come back to this.
I was just wondering what I assume, Max, that you know Plantinga's argument against simplicity.
It's terrible, but go ahead.
Okay, so what's so well? I mean, so the argument's something like if God is identical with his properties, then because he's simple, they all have to be identical to one another as well, and it ends up being that if God, that means that God is a single property, and if he's a property, he's an abstract entity. And if he's an abstract entity, he's causally inert. So then he didn't create the universe, and he doesn't have a relationship with anyone, and he didn't send his son down. Well, so something like that. I'm passing it.
The reason I would say Plantinga's argument is terrible, and I know it's really hard to say that about a philosopher I rather respect, is that he's kind of smuggling in a lot of assumptions about property that exist in modern analytic philosophy that medieval philosophers wouldn't have really cared about or accepted.
Yeah, okay, so let's stop the argument halfway and just say, if God is simple and he has properties, then he is his properties, and then he is only one property. And I think you only need the transitivity of identity to get there. So the basic problem is that if you're simple, then you can't have distinct properties at all, really, because
They would all be
that means that you've got parts. So like there's a contrast, or some kind of clash between having distinct parts and being simple, which is what I'm planting as argument.
That's where analogy comes in. That's where
Right. So I think it relies on a lot more. I think he's relying on three propositions. One is properties are necessarily abstract entities, and that they are necessarily abstract objects. That's one. The second one is properties are necessarily logically and ontologically prior to their instantiations. They are neither necessary, they are necessary conditions of their instantiations. And the third one is properties are necessarily unchanging features of reality, features that do not vary in accordance with their instantiations. So just maybe to parse it out in plainer English, one, properties are necessary parts of this or any other logical, consistent state of affairs you could think of. They are immaterial, timeless, and don't causally interact. The second kind of presumption he has is before you can understand more complex existing things, their basic properties must be presupposed. And the third one is properties are necessarily unchanging features of reality, and they don't differ from one example to another. To speak of John as being just is to speak of Alan being just. Justice exists equally in all these, in both things. Would that be fair to characterize of planting this argument, or?
Yeah, but surely well, from my point of view, anyway, if let's just grant that properties aren't abstract objects for the sake of not having to deal with that bit of the argument.
Mm-hmm.
Just for some reason, accept whatever you want to say about that, and isn't it quite damning anyway, even if you allow that much, because doesn't it mean that God is a property, which already seems weird, and that God is only one single property, and isn't that already weird? However you cash out property, the idea would be that like his goodness and his omnipotence aren't really two distinct properties, or he isn't really simple. Like, I mean, I don't see it. To me, I'm already stumped at this point.
Right.
I don't understand.
Let's make a bit of a distinction here between small p Platonism that a lot of more analytic philosophers accept, and capital P Platonism, which is more of the classical Platonic variety. The difference between the two is, and feel free to correct me, is on a small p Platonism, objects are abstract and they don't causally interact. Whereas under classical Platonism, they're concrete and they do causally interact, and they give particulars and they provide, a universal instantiation of particular things. So that's the first thing to consider. The second thing to consider is just because God is, just because you could express God in one way, as a Platonic form of maybe divinity, being itself, truth itself. A lot of the medieval thinkers had their own way of primarily looking at God. When it comes to how we'd identify God as a person, just because God can be is fully expressed and understood in this in this classical Platonic sense, doesn't mean that God isn't personal or loving or have any of these other qualities. Eleanor Stump kind of gives the example of how physics can understand, I believe, light as a particle or a wave. I think that's how she cashes it out. Likewise, by revelation, we would understand God as personal and loving, and that's a true way of knowing. And another way is through natural philosophy and theology. And if we accept if you accept both sides of the approach, then God just becomes these two ways of understanding God become ontologically equivalent. Just because people in the past understood water as H2O doesn't mean that they didn't understand water. Just because they didn't understand water as H2O and know it was identical to it doesn't mean they knew absolutely nothing of water. They knew its specific function, that it freezes, so on and so forth. So I wouldn't accept the conclusion it's all that weird.
With water and H2O, like if I said something like water's got two different properties, it's wet and it's heavy,
right?
Then its wetness and its heaviness would presumably be cashed out by different parts of the molecular structure of the water. Ultimately, I'd be pointing at different parts of the molecule you want to say, right?
Right.
So something like that. That's a gross simplification, of course, but something along those lines. Like those two properties are not the same thing, and that basically means that they resolve down at the fundamental level to the fact that the thing that you're referring to, H2O, water, whatever, is complex at its most fundamental level. If God is simple at his most fundamental level, then saying that he's just and that he's all powerful can't, like if they're both of those facts ground out in the same simple, then they're the same property. You're hanging your coat on the same hook each time, and that makes them the same. And I don't understand how you square that circle. It seems to me it's just incoherent to say that God has different properties, but he's ultimately simple.
Right, and this is kind of where I incorporated the truth maker defense earlier. One could say that his simplicity grounds the truth of both aspects of his identity when you ultimately cash it out.
Sorry, run that by me again.
Oh, sorry. What I'm saying is, so the reason earlier on where I appealed to simplicity was, as a truth maker, was whether you understand God personally as just, loving, so on and so forth, or understand him simply through natural theology. At the end of the day, it's really this his simplicity which acts as his essence which acts as the truth maker to both of these things.
Isn't understanding him personally or through natural theology an epistemic thing?
Exactly.
So, but we're talking about his actual essence here. So how I access it doesn't make any difference. I could access it by reading a newspaper and finding out about it, or talking to someone on a Google Hangout and finding out about it. But the point is that what I'm finding out about, if it's simple, can't really have distinct properties. The epistemic point it seems to me irrelevant.
Yeah, but you can look at it from different ways. It's like the terms are coextensional. The goodness of God and the justness of God refer to the same thing, even if they mean different things. There's a concept.
But then if the meaning, so if the thing that I'm referring to, so if I say Bert is both funny and happy, then obviously I'm referring to Bert both times, right? That we can understand that.
Yes, but you're referring to Bert with the word Bert. When you say God is good, that's not a predication per se. It's an identification. It's a predication. It's like you're saying God is good. Like he literally is identical to goodness.
Yeah, but so when I say that Bert's both, whatever I said a moment ago, happy and good or whatever, Bert isn't an ontologically simple entity, so I can ground those distinct properties out in different parts of his being. But when you say that God is ontologically simple, the thing you've cut yourself off from is being able to do exactly that. So the idea that you can see it from different perspectives, again, just is a distraction from the fact that, I mean, really, if it's ontologically simple and you're seeing it differently from different perspectives, then the difference is down to you, not the thing you're looking at. And again, it seems to me it's like the epistemic thing, it's irrelevant. The point is a thing that's ontologically simple can't have distinct properties. You can see it as different, like if you put a stick in water, it looks different. That's not a property of the stick.
How about, to use another example, Mark, if I was to say Samuel Clemens wrote Huckleberry Finn and Mark Twain wrote Huckleberry Finn, I could, both those statements have the same truth maker because Mark Twain and Samuel Clemens are the same person. Now, there are some people who don't know that Samuel Clemens is Mark Twain, so they'd probably disagree with what I said, even though they know Mark Twain would be the author of Huckleberry Finn.
Yeah. So that explanation revolves around the fact that those two names are different ways of saying the same thing. But if you think that that's analogous, then you're saying that God is good and saying that he's all-powerful is just two different ways of saying the same thing. If you want to say that, that's fine, but that just means that saying he has distinct properties is not true. He doesn't have distinct properties.
It seems to me what you guys are trying to say is more in the sense of Venus, the morning star, and the evening star, and that there's a qualitative difference. What?
That's how I understand it. I don't know if Max is. Right.
There's a qualitative difference between the two, but that can be cashed out in, like, we can explain what the difference is between the morning star and the evening star in such a way that the sense is different even though it's the same object, it's in two different senses, but there's a property to the sense that makes it such you can talk about it, right? Like there's a difference there that makes a difference.
Wait, are you talking about speaking in terms of analogical language? Like there's something.
That's what I'm
No, what I'm referring to. So if you're going to say that God has the property of being good and being just, and then you're going to say that this is essentially saying the same thing. That's a different thing than saying that Venus is the morning star and Venus is the evening star. There's a reason that we refer, that when we refer to the morning star and we refer to the evening star, there's a reason why that description denotes something different, even though it's the same object. So the property is different, right? Like I don't know that it helps to appeal to it as what, like the fullness of something that somehow, I'm sorry. Sorry, go ahead, Alex. There's a difference in state there.
The way that you get to the object, what's different between them is the description of the object, not the object.
Okay, I can.
Right? And if the object can't, if the object, so the point here is an ontological one, and so what we've found so far is two epistemic objections and now but a linguistic objection. Both of those miss the point because it's a metaphysical point. It's how can a being which is simple have different properties? Fundamentally, that's the problem. And saying, I can see it differently, or I come to know it in a different way. They're both, yes. In both cases, grant you both of those, and neither of them address the point.
I would say it doesn't. The ontologically simple thing doesn't have more than one property.
Yeah, right. It could be. That's planting his argument.
I was saying that it doesn't. For clarification, my morning star, evening star was saying that's inadequate. I'm not saying that actually helps it. I think that's what's trying to be done here, but I don't think it actually.
But one of the things I put forward was nominalizing the properties. They're not something which are more fundamental ontologically, which is just what simplicity is trying to get around. There's no fundamental Platonic abstract properties that God is relying upon, or even concrete ones. Rather, what's going on is that whenever we cash out God as being just, loving, what have you, these are just we're just speaking about properties which God makes true, or statements God makes true.
Yeah, but you're appealing to nominalism at exactly the weakest part of nominalism, because you're saying if we think of properties being nothing more than the things that they refer to, then everything's cool. But part of criticism of nominalism would be that means then that creatures with a kidney and creatures with a heart mean the same thing, and obviously they don't mean the same thing. And you apply the same thing here. If you're saying, well, by omnipotent and omnibenevolent, I just mean God each time, then that's where nominalism is a very unpersuasive theory of properties. So, I mean, like, don't appeal to nominalism at exactly the point where, like, that's the criticism of nominalism, right? I mean, it seems to me it's not an out there. That's just like another. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm jumping all over your hangout. You were talking about penises and stuff, and it was all funny and stuff. And I've come in.
No. This is exactly what I wanted to talk about. I think divine simplicity is something I want to try to kind of dig into a little bit. I think this is good discussion.
The other issue that I think Plantinga brought up that hasn't really been touched upon is the idea. It seems to me like divine simplicity is not tenable for anyone who thinks that God is a personal deity. God is like can interact with us in the way that agents interact. It seems to me like if you want to say that about God, then you can't say that God is divinely simple, because you've tried so hard to say how God has the attributes of something that's purely simple, and then to say, oh yeah, but God, we can have a loving relationship with God. I don't think that those two things work together at all.
Yeah. Regarding the whole personability thing, God is so in terms of understanding God as a person, when the classical theist understands God as a person, what he is saying is that when you look to all the things that make being personal great, God I actually liked the points he was bringing up. When you look at all the qualities or characteristics that make make human beings great or persons great, God instantiates all of those, and to a much greater extent. That's essentially what the classical theist is saying. Whereas, so I really have no problems understanding God as being personal, in the sense that the qualities that I love in human beings pre-exist in God in a more perfect way. It would be like, maybe to use Plato's notion, it'd be like saying, if I think love is worth pursuing in human beings in an imperfect way, then that's all the more reason to like the form of love itself. If that's helping to explain it.
Do you believe that God has more than one property?
It depends on how we'd cash out properties, but
I mean, like in the metaphysical sense, as opposed to like.
I believe. I believe that God is one concrete thing, and whenever you speak about God having properties, you're just speaking about statements of truth making. When I say God is loving, God is just, God is this, that, or the other, all I'm saying is that God's simple nature instantiates the truth to all of those statements.
So you're merely saying, when you say God is love, you're saying for whatever it is to love, God is the precondition of that.
Yes.
Well, this might be related to another point, and tell me if you think this is in the right direction. The distinction between creator and creation, right?
Right.
We instantiate love in a way differently than God instantiates love. If God's the precondition for us to love as we love, if God is like the form of love, if you will,
right?
How is it that God loves at all? Like, how is it? No, how is it that in a sense, how do we love? How does love instantiate itself at all?
Oh, right. So in the New Testament, the term that's often used for God, when we say God is love, is agape. This is unlike, let's say, the other forms of love, which are romantic, brotherly, or platonic. That's when we love someone in a reciprocal fashion. We're engaged in a romantic relationship because there's someone else that's reciprocating romance to us. Whereas agape is charity. It's willing the good for its own sake. So when I say God is loving, what I'm saying is God is willing the good for creation. And by extent, that would mean that God is willing himself for all of creation. God is giving himself.
How does creation come to? How does creation, like, how does anything other than God? And I'm seeing too many connections here to express this and still relate it to the same problem.
I was actually kind of waiting for Jack to grill me because no one does it better than he does.
Yeah, what happened to Jack?
I know. I think he's trying to get his mic working.
Oh.
Although I'm not sure. I'm gonna Facebook Alex because I really want to check out his objection to nominalism, because he was giving one that I didn't fully grasp.
It's super late right now for him, so I know he's probably headed out. Did you want to talk about this some more, Frank, or
does anyone else want to say something else? Because I'm writing notes now. So
I was going to change topics because I'm also curious to hear Max's views. Or Dash, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I'm not sure about divine. I guess I'm sort of following, but I think if I understand correctly, divine simplicity is the statement that God existence is simple, not it's not a complex. I mean, I sort of not understand it. I sort of have a language gap. But, I guess God is simple in the sense of the kalam, that what he will is his will, and his existence is the sort of unknown that I started to talk about in a sense. You ultimately you can't really say any attributes because of that. It's the argument of Maimonides against the Kalam, essentially, that you can't really speak on positive attributes in meaningful manner.
I wanted to talk to Eddie about some shit he was saying earlier in the stream.
Okay.
Sure.
So you were saying that God is a precondition for love, I guess, is what you were saying?
That's the way Frank fleshed out for me.
What?
If you like, I could. So
that's the way Frank what?
That's the way Frank fleshed it out for me. So when I say and then later on,
you believe that?
I'm sorry.
Wait, you believe that?
He thinks in terms of truth makers. I just think of things differently, but
yeah.
What are you talking about? Shut up, Joe. Shut the fuck up, Joe. Don't come in.
Right,
don't come in with
this
that
is
fucking
no longer
attitude.
the PG.
Joe, just flip over
Don't
and
come
stay
in with
calm.
that fucking attitude. Joe is fucking with me right now.
I'm not even talking to
Max.
you. Who are you? Have we met before?
Get the fuck out of here, Joe. Someone kick Joe. Bert, can you kick Joe from the fucking hangout?
Joe, I'm gonna unbroadcast you until you can behave yourself. So, sorry, Max. Sorry, Max. You were saying,
right? So, I would say that God is the primary truth maker for anyone loving or doing, for anyone engaging in love, and by love I mean in the Greek sense of agape, which is willing the good for another person for its own sake.
So is that like saying that he's the standard by which you could say that you are loving, such that when you do it, that is the ruler by which it's determined whether you've measured out essentially like an inch or whatever, or a yard, or that you're actually doing the thing that does that make sense, Max?
So under truth makers, the way I'd flesh it out is this: if I was to say the cup is red, and I really wish I had a camera right now. You know what? I'll just use the realistic nihilist. If I was to say his shirt is black, and it is, then there's a truth maker that makes that proposition the case, which is his shirt, and the fact that it instantiates blackness, whatever that might be.
So God is essentially like one giant simple form by which
and he's the truth maker to all these propositions while remaining that one simple form.
Wouldn't that make him the truth maker of all propositions?
Not really. So no.
I don't understand. I don't know. You said that.
So only propositions that would concern him, because if I was to say that I exist, and if I was to say that God exists and I exist, unless I exist and the realistic nihilist exists, and the realistic nihilist didn't exist, then that would be false, because God would only be one half of that truth maker. It would require both of those things to pass. I guess you could kind of break it down modally, but that would be kind of a different discussion revolving around brute facts and the PSR and stuff.
How is God a truth maker? For God makes what property? Are you saying that things are dependent on God and therefore he's the truth maker?
Are you saying that no proposition can be true if God doesn't exist?
Well, he's
God
saying
is the truth maker, and God is the truth maker in the sense that there is nothing for anything you say about God. He isn't reliant upon anything more basic than his own being or anything extrinsic to his being to say true propositions about him.
Hold on. Listen to what CK said. CK asked you if propositions couldn't be true without God existing, right? God is the truth maker of all propositions. Then it couldn't be the case that there's a true proposition such that God doesn't exist or something like that, right?
So in order for any truth maker to what I understand him to be saying is, if I was to state any proposition is the case, God would have to exist alongside everything else. Is that it?
Well, what I was saying was that are you saying that no proposition can be true on atheism?
If theism is correct, that would be the case. But I'm not making an argument for theism. I'm just arguing for a consistent view, an internally consistent view of divine simplicity.
I'm still trying to understand. Just basically, he's just explaining his view is what he's doing. I still don't get it.
That's okay. So I have this view on a personal being.
If anyone's interested in the view I've been propounding, if you look at the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, there's a whole section on the truth maker explanation, and it's provided by a philosopher whose last name is Bauer. I think Geoffrey Bauer is his full name, or G.E. Bauer. Yeah, sure, CK.
I can post it in the external chat too. So you were saying, Starfish, what were you going to say? Joe Starfish, you there?
I thought his name was Sunseed.
What? His last name's Sunseed?
Wait, never mind. I'm thinking of somebody else.
I think when you were saying Starfish, we were confusing him for Bert's wife.
Oh.
Hey, those are you said that, not me.
Wait a minute, Joe's not Asian. What the hell? Come on.
We don't know that. You might.
Joe, are you Asian, Joe?
Am I Asian? No.
Yeah. It's bizarre. So did you have something you wanted to say, Joe?
No. Well, I mean, if we've already covered essentially Max's response to it. I guess we don't have to go forward with it. It's just, I don't know if I really got your argument against the concept of God being a personal being, being a problem for divine simplicity, is that God has the perfect version of all those properties we associate with a perfect.
Oh no!
I'm sorry, with a personal being.
No, what I was doing was just nominalizing properties so that there isn't anything more basic to God's ontology.
But would you say Max that he takes on accidental properties then?
Wait, how the fuck? Hold on a sec. How the fuck do you nominalize properties?
That's what divine simplicity is, right? Like that's what's posited, is that the properties are the, like I said, the attenuation of those experiencing them, that's the view, right? Not the thing, the source of the properties is not the thing that is broken up. It's the experience of by the individuals, right?
And there are aren't there also anti-realist views regarding properties anyway? Like,
I was just saying that my understanding, the best way I've heard it put from my Reformed friends that I still don't understand, but at least it gets me closer to than like something like Trey Jadlow would give me, is that God is the fullness of his being, and the properties that we experience of God is our experience of him. We are the ones that actually have things that attenuate that fullness, and we experience those as properties, but those aren't parts of God. God is the fullness of himself, and it is our experience to him, or our relationship to him, which attenuates these things and causes us to experience them as various properties.
Burpool has lost his mind.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying that.
Well, when you're saying what Trey Jadlow thinks, you're gonna sound like
no. Trey Jadlow doesn't say that. He says something far worse.
Oh, okay.
He'll say that God. He'll say God is grieving and ungrieving at the same time, right? But that's not what a Reformed individual would say. They'd say that God is not neither grieving nor ungrieving. It is that we are experiencing his grief. We're experiencing grieving and ungrieving as if it is God's, but that is really our filter of his fullness.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, this is just like at the end of the day, when you try and figure out something important about God and something important about an attribute of God, you have to go, oh yeah, but that's just how we experience it. We don't really know how exactly to explain this.
Well, that's what Jimmy was conveying last week or two ago, right? Was that God has his own goodness, and then there's a different standard of goodness that we are held to.
Yeah. So when you ask, well, what's the link between the goodnesses
right.
of our
does the one derive
God?
Does the one, you can't treat the one as arbitrary if it's derivative of a necessary nature, right?
Yeah. What justifies calling both good if we can't possibly identify something each has some like similar quality? If God is so beyond our experience, beyond our thoughts, we can't say anything about it. What justifies saying that he's good, right?
We're done. If we end up running the course of this, I wouldn't mind talking about Max's views on. I don't know what your view is on God's being timeless either, Max. I thought that would be an interesting thing to talk about.
Yeah, my view on God's timelessness is I adopt a tenseless view of time, and I just adopt a B theory, and that way, God. When I say God creates, all I'm saying, or God causes the universe, all I'm saying is God causes space-time in the sense of God is A, space and time is B. If A didn't exist, then B wouldn't exist. That would be the language I'd flesh it out as.
But you would see God as B. God is B time, but the universe as A time.
No, I would consider both the universe and God. I would see the universe as B time, and I would also see God as being immutable and not having the properties of being spatial or temporal.
So all have all exist within one B-time block then, including his creative act?
No, I think that God exists outside of the block, but he sustains the block in existence.
But he's his own block.
The God block.
The God block.
Don't God block me, man.
I wouldn't.
That's funnier than how everyone's acting right now.
I wouldn't use the term block either, because block itself presupposes some kind of extension. And that's not something I want to apply to God.
The God block is extended.
Fair enough.
Wait. So does God when God creates the universe, right? So the universe is what the hell is fapping? God creates the universe as a B-time block. Then does he instantiate it? Does he act to instantiate it, or has he always acted?
Oh, the relationship between the cause and the effect is timeless. That's how I would put it. There isn't a moment where the space block didn't exist and then just existed. Rather, when I say that the universe began to exist, all I'm saying is that there is, an edge of the block.
You're saying that time came into existence with the universe, but would you say that God God intended to act before he acted, or how does God's actions? Do you see them working that?
Is it simultaneous, or? Right,
exactly. Like, does God intend to act and then act, or does the action just happen like unintended? Well, it can't be unintended, right? We want to be able to say that God intends to act.
Well, God's reasons would exist eternally in his own being. So that would be it. So that would regard that. So if God has reasons to create, those reasons exist within his own being, and they would be enacted with the existence of space-time.
On divine simplicity, isn't the act supposed to be synonymous with the actor, though?
The act, no, the act. So if we say the action, if we, in terms of thinking about the act as the effect, then no, the effect is not part of the cause. The reasons behind the effect are eternally a part of the cause, but not the cause itself. Like in a B-time universe, I exist. I'm sitting right here on this computer, and the future, whatever it is I do, exists there. But the reasons I have now are going to play some kind of causal role in the future. And those two things are tenseless, even though there's going to be a huge swath of block in between the cause, me, and the effect, the other thing somewhere down the line.
How do you talk tenselessly about God's act and the antecedent moment? Like, that's the thing I have a really hard time with. Like, I would just posit metatime. I would posit God existing in metatime, right? That there's a time that is not correlates to God, or is it's similar to notions of forms that God meets, that are eternal alongside him, that are not. It is it's the fullness of it, but I don't understand how you have how you talk about a tenseless act. It seems like the act to cause time to come into being presupposes or requires an antecedent moment act in.
Well, it goes back to, there are a variety of ways to break down causality. And the way I'm kind of breaking it down is in a way similar to Hume, which is A is the cause of B if and only if if there is no A, there is no B. So it's more of a counterfactual kind of understanding.
So Max, go ahead.
Oh, right. So when I'm talking about God causing the universe to come into existence, all I'm saying is if God exists, then the universe exists, and if God did not exist, then the universe would not exist. So it's kind of a counterfactual relationship that I can speak about, and I don't think I need to invoke time in there.
So one quick question about the B theory of time, right? Sure. Isn't there something in that where it suggests that that the universe is past eternal?
No, I don't see that as I don't see that as a necessity for a B time. I think in terms of B time, you could have it. You could even have a starting point at the Big Bang itself. You know, in the way that a ruler has a starting point. It doesn't mean that 1 inch of the ruler exists, and as you go down the ruler, it starts coming into existence. It just means that there's a start. There's a starting side to it.
Yeah.
Okay. So when the universe was created, essentially what it's saying to me, at least, is that when the universe came into existence, right? Let's call the universe the ruler, right? Since at that point,
the universe didn't come into existence in the sense that, in the sense of that you're already introducing tenseless language.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
You do, because I don't. How? What are you talking about?
You're already introducing tenseless language.
How do you talk about it then? What would you say? It obtained or it?
Well, it seemed like your explanation of causality was irrelevant to Bert's question about what he was talking about. What does creation mean? You're just saying if creation just means it has a cause, right? And you're taking it to be some sort of dependency relation.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So you're saying God created the universe, and that was a non-temporal notion. It was like a
counterfactual. If to say A causes B is to say that if A didn't exist, B would not exist. That's kind of the counterfactual notion of causality I was giving. And that's how I would characterize creation.
So you want to say that the universe depends on God's existence, and that's what it means to have created something?
Yes.
So God doesn't act then to bring about the universe. It just is. How is it in relation? Like, how is it dependent or contingent on God? It's not happenstance, right? It doesn't just obtain uncaused. Like, we want to say that God derives the universe, right?
So
I'm not sure what you mean when you say. I'm not sure exactly what you mean when you say derives the universe. When I'm speaking about creation, I'm appealing to the counterfactual component of the way causality operates. And when I say God is the creator of the universe, all I'm saying is if God doesn't exist is to say God created the universe is to say that if God doesn't exist, then the universe doesn't exist.
Right. You're saying that it's contingent on God's existence that the universe exists, and
exactly.
but you're trying to say that there's not a causal correlation there. So what I'm trying to understand is what is.
No, I agree that there is a causal correlation. What I'm saying is I don't have I'm not using causality, or I don't have an understanding of causality that is too robust.
His causality is counterfactuality. Like, is this sort of counterfactual determinacy?
Thank you.
Okay, because what I was going to ask was, do you need time to have causality in the first place? Or is it independent of time?
I think it's independent of time.
But there's a tense to causality, though, right? Like, there's a time prior to cause and then the cause, right?
No.
It's not eternally caused, right? Cause has a.
What I'm doing is breaking counterfactuality. What I'm just doing is breaking down counterfactual. causality into counterfactuality, as Frank would say. I'm treating those two things as the same thing.
So if you took two, I was talking about this with Alex the other day. If you took two premises in an argument that might have one might determine the other, might have a contingent relationship and not cause the other, right? Like they're just simply contingent, not in the way that Trey would or somebody like that would misuse it, but just that it just means that that the one determines the other, that one is contingent on the other in order for it to be the case, right? Like, so Nixon could be president in a possible world. That could be contingent on Hubert Humphrey not being president in that world, right? But they're not causally contingent, right? And it seems like you're wanting to say that about God creating or God and creation, that the one is a necessary or is contingent on the other being the case. But you're wanting to say nothing more than that. And I don't then understand what it is.
You're asking why, like if you would get more precise, why does it exist this way rather than that way? Like rather than merely just exist at all?
What is God's connection with this? So the universe is a fact and God is a fact. And we're saying that there's a contingency between them, right? That if one was not the case, the other would not be, right?
Right.
And I can flesh that out in terms of Humphrey and Nixon in terms of presence. I can explain why that is, what that relationship is. But in terms of God, we're trying to say that he's a creator. He derives states of affairs. He's from which states of affairs are derived. So I don't think it suffices to simply talk about it as if it was the case of Humphrey and Nixon being president, that one could be president if the other was not. It's contingent on the other fact. I don't know that going to that level gives an adequate explanation of what it is we're trying to say when we say God created the universe.
Right. And this is usually, and from what I understand, isn't this usually the case where, and from what I understand, isn't this why a theist would posit an argument for God's existence? Because they want to give a reason why the universe isn't adequate to exist on its own without God existing. This is where I think an appeal to any kind of argument for God's existence would suffice.
Well, I don't know that we have to go to that point. We're simply talking about God being timeless, or whether he exists in some meta time, or is there, like, I'm trying to understand whether God has changed, what it means when we say God is changeless, right? Like, those things don't make sense to me.
So change would exist. So I understand change is existing throughout space and time, like because time is a property of space.
We agree on that, right? Like we understand time. We understand change, time, space in the context of a universe. And what I'm trying to understand is
I'm saying that relationship doesn't exist within God's own being.
Right, and I'm trying to understand how a state of affairs comes about, derived from God, and how we have a conversation about that when he is changeless and timeless.
What do you mean comes about from God? Do you mean it in a way which has tense, or in a way which is tenseless?
What I'm saying is my primary confusion is how do we not talk about it in a tense way when we talk about it deriving? Like, what does it mean? What does it mean to have it connected to this other fact in something more than just the Humphrey Nixon example of that these two states of affairs just happen to be in relation this way? That is not the case with God and creation, right? Like, creation is created in God's image, or has it is not merely a state of affairs that obtains that is necessary, that God is the necessary, like, so let's say we were to say God is the necessary fact for a state of affairs to come about, but that it would be unrelated to God completely, that these states of affairs would come about only if God was the case, but that God would be entirely separate from those states obtaining. They obtained completely independently of God being the case, except for the fact that he needs to be there for those to take place. That I could understand, of God being a tenseless thing that is that universes are contingent on, but they don't derive anything from him. He doesn't act to cause them. He doesn't have any type of relationship with them. It just happens to be the case that these two facts have to be in relationship with each other, where one is contingent on the other being the case in order for it to obtain. But when we want to say that God does something, or has, that there's some something that is to talk about God in relation to this, that it isn't just the state of affairs coming about unrelated, then I don't understand what you're talking about when you say God's tenseless, because I don't know how.
Are you asking what exactly is the relationship between God's existence?
I'm asking how do we talk about God being tenseless when I don't know how to talk about him having any type of action or anything else, any type of relationship in an action way.
Aren't some causes sustaining? Like, God can sustain the universe in existence.
Right, but there was a time that God didn't sustain the universe, right?
No, there wouldn't be any prior time to God not sustaining the universe. God sustains time from time T1 and onward.
Yeah, time itself is. He takes a B theory of time. Time is itself tenseless in his view.
But God is not. But God is not. Doesn't exist within the same block, right? He's saying that this B time came about.
Well, I don't.
It's not. It's not. The B time.
He just wouldn't be dependent on it.
Right.
Isn't the antecedent impossible on your view? In the conditional you posited, the antecedent is impossible, so whatever follows from an impossible antecedent is trivial, right? There's going to be a trivial truth. It doesn't matter what you say. You say, if God did not exist, since that's necessarily false, then the universe could exist. It's also the case that the universe could not exist, right? So on and so forth.
It's not a logical relation. It's the whole condition. The counterfactual thing is it's I guess ontological contingency. It's that the thing itself, the existence of the thing, of anything other than God, is dependent upon God. And if God had not existed, nothing would exist. That's the counterfactual. It's that whole description.
If I understand correctly,
it doesn't entail anything. The state, the other side of the counterfactual. If God, something exists, if it exists because God exists, and the counterfactual is, had God not existed, no thing would exist.
Yeah, but had God not existed is an impossible world on that, right? It's impossible on that view.
It's an epistemic. It's not like a.
If we're saying couldn't, are you asking? Are you saying because God does? Are you saying because God exists in all possible worlds, that the universe must necessarily obtain in all possible worlds? Because without, because if we say that,
it's like saying if the number 7 weren't prime, I'd be a monkey's uncle. It's also true that if the number 7 weren't prime, that I wouldn't be a monkey's uncle, and so on and so forth, because the antecedent
God's
is necessarily false.
That's a different notion of necessity. There's necessity in the sense of something which is like explained by its own nature, something which is self-existent, and then there's necessity in the sense that something can't be false. One is the necessity of a proposition, the other is the necessity of a being. God's being is necessary, not like, and in turn, propositions regarding God's being is true, but like God is not existentially dependent on anything. He's existential.
I don't understand the objection you're rendering. Like, you're trying to tell me
you're saying that to deny a true proposition, right? The explosion only entails when you deny when you accept the contradiction or something like that. If something is necessarily true,
it's not explosion. I'm not saying that there's. All right.
Was this Frank's argument that you're asking about, Josh, or was it Max's argument?
Max's argument, but Frank is defending my viewpoint, which I appreciate.
I'll stop if you want me to.
No, I appreciate it.
It's.
If I understand correctly, you talk on sort of relation between the table and the carpenter. When we say that there is the cause of the table is the carpenter, we don't say it's not invoke time necessarily.
That's not saying my list objection, I don't think.
So I think in terms of speaking about necessity, there are levels of it. As Frank was nice enough to point out. So if H2O wasn't identical to water, then water wouldn't freeze. Like, if I was to speak of counterfactual relationships due to some kind of metaphysical necessity, that's the only kind of necessity I'm positing for God, not necessarily any kind of logical necessity. And in terms of the universe obtaining from God's necessity, the universe's existence would have to be sustained by God. And in terms of why that would be the case, this is at the point where the theist me would have to posit some kind of argument for his existence, why some aspect of the universe entails God needing to exist.
Isn't causality usually a dependency relation between events, especially on Hume's view, which is what you invoked?
Yeah, that what you just said, Max, was fine by me. If the two are not causally related, or doesn't have, and I know you're going to ask me then, am I using cause in the tenseless sense or in the tensed sense? Because cause necessarily invokes tense, but then I don't understand what you're talking about when there's a tenseless sense in which God derives states of affairs or brings about, or like, I don't even know how to, if you were to simply say that, like I said, that God is the fact upon which universes are contingent, but doesn't have any type of tensed causal interaction or any type of relationship that would cause him to be tensed, then I would see these as being states of affairs that come about that obtain independent of God, except for the fact that God has to be the case for them to obtain.
Well,
but I don't know what relationship he then has with them, other than that he is the requisite state of affairs for them to be the case.
Oh, so just to use a kind of a famous example, I think Hume uses billiard balls, but one way of looking at it is, imagine if I was to throw a brick at a window, and I was to say the brick went through the window, and I was also to say that the window broke. Both the cause of the window breaking and the window breaking, the effect, would be in that description, or at least that kind of understanding, simultaneous to one another. And what I'm invoking is that God sustaining from time t1 onward is simultaneous to be existing, and from there I would derive the count. I would provide the counterfactual account I was describing earlier. Now, I know Hume goes for an event causality, but I don't see why this counterfactual notion can't work out when you parse out causality by the relationship between the affecting agent and the affected agents, especially when they can be simultaneous to one another.
So I'm going to take a moment here because I actually have to run. I have a thing I have to go to, but I'm going to continue this off air, and I'll post the link again in the chat for anyone who wants to join. But I wanted to thank you, Max, for hanging out. I'm sorry we got a late start and have to cut it short.
That was my bad.
No, but I'll go back and watch through this, and actually I wouldn't mind potentially talking to you about this in the future. I'll see if I can wrap my head around at least more what you mean by it, because I think I'm like on both the simplicity and timelessness. I want to make sure that I'm at least understanding your view to the point where I could articulate it the way you do.
To be fair, I should actually tell everybody this. I never come into a hangout with just one view. There are plenty of views I lean upon when giving an apologetic, but there's not one view I see myself as being purely committed to. Whenever I'm exploring any kind of metaphysic in an apologetic in a hangout, what I usually like to do is use interlocutors as a way of refining fire, testing what seems to stick and what seems to burn away.
That is essentially what I do.
Cool. Well,
so
I'm going to
find inconsistencies between what I'm saying. It most likely is a result of that.
I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast, but thank you everybody for sharing Saturday with me and Max, and thank you external chat. Go check out Alex's hang with Matt Slick earlier. It's good for a laugh. So comedy gold.